What do poetry, fire, and podcasting have in common? Right, you guessed it. It has to do with your final assessment over this poetry unit we've been doing. It was common for people in the 1800s, after a long day's work, to gather around a fire and tell stories. Remember, this is a time before the internet, so there weren't a whole lot of options for, solo entertainment. Your final assessment for this unit seeks to give you a little taste of what that was like. But I also want to incorporate the latest and greatest technology that we have available to us, Zoom. Maybe you're zoomed out, but we can handle one more. Your task is to record a podcast. We're getting into podcasting with a small group of fellow students who've read a specific Emily Dickinson poem you choose. So here's your project. Since the start of the semester, our class has studied a variety of poems and prose that make deeply implicit philosophical statements. Now, it's your turn to apply your skills of thinking deeply about literature and demonstrate your process. Here's your task. Choose in your group an Emily Dickinson poem from the options provided. In Schoology, you can click that link and it'll take you to the poems that are available. Work in a group to study, interpret, teach, and act out the text. To do that, you're going to record a 15-minute approximately video podcast about the poem over Zoom with your group. Now, each group has about 4 people in it, and I've got 4 different jobs laid out here so that each person plays a specific role in their group. One person, you're going to be the academic. This person's primary job is to analyze the poem in the podcast. You describe the rhymes, the rhyme scheme, the meter of the poem. If you notice any metaphors or similes, you'd want to explain those, especially focusing on what we've talked about, the literal objects and their figurative meanings and their comparisons. You also want to pay attention to sound effects. Emily Dickinson does play with alliteration, assonance, onomatopoeia sometimes, and you want to focus on significance of those. A real tip for you is to pay attention to any words in the poem that are capitalized, because those are almost always significant. Lastly, you should know, because we've only read a few Emily Dickinson poems, Emily Dickinson is famous for using paradoxes, situations or statements that seem false but are inherently true. So the second job here is the job of the interpreter. And this person is going to discuss the meanings of the poem, possible meanings from the poem, and how the themes of the poem are made clear in the text. And you want to, sort of consider the devices the academic brings up. You also really want to personally connect with the poem, or maybe have people in your group tell stories about their personal connections. You can relate it to something else you've read or seen. You could write your own poem in response. Just remember, if you're the interpreter, remember that saying, if you know the way broadly, you see it in all things. And that's the key. Look around you and try to find this poem in your life. Actors, your job, primary job here is to read the poem fluently, showing a masterful understanding of the poem, the poet's intended pacing, and the appropriate tone. Now, you might choose to put emphasis on certain words, and you want to explain the significance of that emphasis. Remember, we looked at the sentence, "My son didn't break the window," and we saw how if you emphasize certain words in that sentence, it might change the meaning. Examples for anybody who missed it. If you say, "My son didn't break the window," it is, deflecting guilt from your son to someone else's son. It wasn't my son who broke the window, it was your son who broke the window. Similarly, if you say, My son didn't break the window. He didn't break it. He just maybe cracked it or chipped it. It minimizes the significance of the break. You could also just say, my son didn't break the window. He didn't break the most important, most significant window. He broke a little side window. Every word, depending on how it's emphasized, can change the meaning of that sentence. So be careful in what words you choose to elevate. Also, you're the person who pays attention to the punctuation. Why are the commas where they are? Or why are there periods used, perhaps? What's the effect of the dashes? Think about your specific tone and the way that you're reading throughout that, and then debrief us on your choices as an actor. Finally, for you teachers out there, anybody who wants to become a teacher, this is for you. You should prepare 3 or more thoughtful questions for the class to answer about the poem. These are, the extended response style questions, not plot-based or detail specific. You're also the person who, does the engagement with the audience. So you're going to try to hook us. Like in the beginning of this video, you saw me ask about fire, podcasting, and poems, and I asked you what the relationship was. That's a hook technique, and you have to use one in your presentation. You also, if any group members in our audience or you get comments that come in from your podcast, you want to respond to those. And it's your job to operate the Zoom, to share the recording, to do all the tech stuff, and make sure you say thank you and wrap up your video nicely at the end. So, folks, we're getting into podcasting here. Good luck. A couple of little reminders for business sake. This is 30 points on third quarter. You want to make sure all of you in your Zoom call have your cameras and mics unmuted for the podcast. And then always good etiquette, sitting up. You're not lying on your couch or your bed. You're sitting up in a well-lit area in clothing appropriate for school. You have to be free from distractions as much as possible. You won't lose points if a cat jumps up or a dog barks, but if you can control your environment, please try to do so. And then remember, the presentation for the podcast is part of that 30-point grade. Anybody have any questions, send me an email or a Schoology message. Really appreciate it. Good luck, everybody. We'll talk soon.